Okay, hello.
All right, I've got Cameron on the line, and we're live on the air. I'm gonna run that intro. Good morning. I'm here in the studio by myself, but I've got Cameron on the line with me. Say good morning, Cameron.
Good morning, Cameron.
That's my man. And we are going to talk about Tyre Nichols. We're going to talk about what happened there. And I see GCM says FTP, good morning, Patriots, rip Tyre. FTP, absolutely. Let me say this right off.
Hadn't been filmed here. Yeah.
Let me say this right off the cuff. You know, we were lucky to get the body cam footage out and the overhead footage from the traffic cam that we have. And we're not going to look at much footage. We're going to look at a little bit of the footage from the incident this morning to make one particular point. But as far as the more detailed, more graphic, violent footage, we will discuss some of what was seen there. We have watched it. We watched it with Alex and Danny on Saturday morning. They did a fantastic kind of deep dive into what you see in that footage, and it is brutal. It is there is no excuse here, but there are some larger social and political implications that need to be discussed around this particular case. And so bear with me. I'm gonna go for just a minute on this, Cameron, but on this show we have discussed police brutality and racism several times on this show and made the point repeatedly that all your martyrs are monsters. Every time you hear one of these stories where, a poor young black man, a poor innocent black man was brutalized by white police officers because all white people and especially police are racist and he did nothing wrong, except every time you get that story, it's Michael Brown who punched the police officer in the face several times and actually had his hand on the officer's gun and lost that argument. Or it's Rayshard Brooks, who in a drunken stupor stole a weapon from a police officer and attempted to murder him. Or it's St. Floyd of Fentanyl, who, while inebriated, committed a crime, a serious federal crime, trying to pass off counterfeit bills, and then assaulted police in the course of his arrest, while demanding he be placed on the ground for his own comfort, and then died suddenly because he had COVID and he had enough fentanyl in his system to kill an elephant. But of course, that was the fault of the white police officer. Well, and in all those cases, and just about every other one you can think of, what we find is not only was the alleged victim of the police brutality not only were they basically resisting arrest in a very serious way, like committing assault against officers. It's one thing to fight back, like, no, I'm not going to let you put my hands behind my back. But no, we're talking about people who use deadly weapons in contravention of the police in the performance of their duties, things of that nature. And as you know, I am not one to defend the police generally, but in all of these cases where they're trying to make the argument that police are evil and racist and only pick on black people, we find out that there is a significant criminal history and the implementation of serious violence in the course of the arrest that resulted in the police taking the actions they did, which resulted in the death of the new martyr. And I've said it 1,000 times, we even have a playlist on this channel for it called All Your Martyrs Are Monsters. And then we come to the case of Tyre Nichols, where there's a few things that we're going to talk about here. Tyre Nichols appears to be an actual innocent. It very much looks like there's no evidence of a significant criminal history here. We'll talk a little bit about his resisting and fleeing, because that is a factor, but there are, like I said before, the other cases you're looking at, Rayshard Brooks taking a weapon and attacking police with the police's own weapon. You're looking at I can't remember his name, but the guy that grabbed the knife out of his car and tried to attack the police with a knife and got shot for his trouble after raping his baby mama while he was restricted by a temporary restraining order. All those. You don't have any kind of violence, use of a weapon, anything like that with Tyre. Instead, what you have is police who gave him every reason in the world to fear for his life. And I will make the argument in a moment that if Tyre had opened fire on these officers and none of them survived, he would have been perfectly justified in that activity. So we're going to talk about that in detail. Cameron, I have the initial footage of where they first pulled Tyre over before he tried to run away from the police, and we're going to talk about what happens in that footage. I know you've already seen it, so it'll be okay that you're not seeing it with us while the audience is watching it with me. But is there anything that you want to discuss before I flip over to that cut?
I just wanted to reinforce how narrative busting this is, kind of for everybody. The Black Lives Matter types are scrambling to say that this is still racism, even though everybody involved was black.
Oh yeah, we're going to get to that in a minute. We're going to get to that too.
And even though you said it, I'd really reiterate it. This even trips up our own narrative, where, like you say, all your martyrs are monsters. Except in this case, that's not what it was. And normally, I would say if you resist arrest and you get hurt, I don't have a lot of sympathy for you. But again, in this case, I think the narrative goes opposite because, man, as we'll see in a moment, as you and I have already seen, they were so aggressive and hostile with him from the very first second they had an interaction with him. I might have resisted that arrest. So everything about this is, you should be taking an internal look. If you say you've got this whole thing figured out, then I don't think anybody's got this whole thing figured out.
And then, the last thing I want to say before I play this, as far as the All Your Martyrs Are Monsters thing, another thing that we have reiterated, you'll often hear on the right, people will say, black men represent less than 13% of the population, but they also represent more than 50% of all violent crime. And then on the left, you'll hear it said as a complaint, right? Black men are less than 13% of the population, but they make up more than 50% of prison inmates. And we're saying the same thing. Believe it or not, those are the same claim. Now, there is some nuance there to discuss relative to corruption in systems, like the fact that a DA gets to charge you money if he loses your case, which is incredibly corrupt. But that's a whole nother thing that, good God, we're going to have to do a show on that one eventually.
Real quick, too, what happened here was so egregious that even if Tyre Nichols was a monster, I mean, you beat a man to death. That's a seriously specific activity.
Correct.
In fact, if you know anything about gang culture, this is what gangs do. They literally gang up on somebody and kick the shit out of them. And that is quite literally what they did to Tyre Nichols here.
Okay, and yeah, but yes, but before you said that, what I was getting to is with the All Your Martyrs Are Monsters storyline that we've discussed many times. One of the points that we've made is, if it were actually the case that innocent black men, for no reason at all, were being randomly targeted and murdered by the police constantly, those stories would be the headlines. We would see those stories of innocent black men. Instead, in order to spin that narrative, what we're spoon-fed constantly are your George Floyds, your Michael Browns, your Rayshard Brookses, black men with long criminal histories, violent criminal histories, engaged in violence against the police, and then being killed for their trouble, in order to support a narrative that innocent black men for no reason at all are constantly murdered. If the Tyre Nichols story were the one that were prevalent, were the one that were occurring frequently, we would all be up in arms about it. We would all be furious about it, right? Because and then I want to, one more thing there. Take the George Floyd death, for instance. Floyd died it was bad, right? I'm not saying it was good that George Floyd died. He brought it on himself through a series of extremely bad choices, including the armed assault and brutal battery of a pregnant woman, drug dealing, drug abuse, counterfeit work, etc. But he wasn't brutally beaten to death, right? This story is one that is absolute brutality. And I also want to remind you, though, that the only reason you're hearing about this story is because the victim is black. So before I play the footage, which I'm about to, I want to remind you guys, most of you have not heard the name Tony Timpa. And that's because while Tony Timpa was killed under circumstances very similar to the actual arrest circumstances, keep in mind, Tony Timpa did not have a violent criminal record. Tony Timpa did not assault the police. Tony Timpa was pinned down, knocked unconscious, and shoved into basically a mud puddle where he was left to drown while the police stood around looking at his unconscious body drowning in the mud and waiting for over half an hour for paramedics to arrive after he screamed, "You're going to kill me, you're going to kill me, let me up, I can't breathe," etc., etc. But Tony Timpa was white. This happened a little before the George Floyd incident, and most of you never heard his name because he was a white man that was murdered by the police. Now, like Tyre Nichols, Tony Timpa was not a repeat violent offender, right? So I want to take a moment and show you some of this footage. This is actually, I'm playing this from the CNN website. Oh, here, let me enable the audio on that for you, because the things that the officers say actually matter in this case. It's not just the actual activity. Okay, so
the Memphis Police Department released video clips of the deadly arrest of Tyre Nichols, a 29-year-old black man who was pulled over for suspected reckless driving on January 7th. The footage you are about to see contains disturbing images and language. This first video clip shows the moment officers pulled over and confronted Nichols.
Hey, I didn't turn your ass around. All right. On the ground. Hey, you don't do that, okay? Get on the fucking ground. Get All right, I'm on the ground. Lay down! Lay down! Chest up, lay down! Please stay on the ground! I think I tased you! Get on the ground! Lay down!
Okay, so what we have there, right, the claim, as it's reported, is that he was pulled over for quote-unquote reckless driving. He was pulled over for reckless driving, surrounded by, it looks like 4 police cars. One pulled in front of him to cut him off. They surrounded him, and then these officers, who, by the way, they're just in black tactical gear in unmarked cars, right? They're part of this special Scorpion strike team, which I hope we have time to get to lampooning that son of a bitch. And Cameron, I guess the gloves are off on the F-bomb, because I actually expected that version of the clip. It's a different version than I had pulled up originally. I expected it to still be censored, and it wasn't. So, sorry, YouTube. The fuck word came from the police this morning. You're welcome. But they pulled him over for quote-unquote reckless driving, and you saw what happened. You didn't have an officer walk up and
driving 100 miles an hour in a school zone.
Right,
like, that's a pretty intense response.
Right. Did he run over 4 kids while he was driving recklessly? And what you have is they surround him. You don't have an officer come up and knock on the window. Hey, do you know why I pulled you over? We need to talk about how you crossed the double yellow line, or et cetera, et cetera. No, from the very beginning, from the first moment the officers leave their vehicles, one of them draws a gun. Another has a taser in his hand. They drag the guy bodily from the car without making any statement about, the reason you're being pulled over, the reason you're being arrested, right? They gave him no justification. They did not in any way clarify the circumstances of the activity. Immediately started fighting him, dragging him bodily from his vehicle and shoving him to the ground. And you heard him say, okay, I'm going, I'm getting down, I'm on the ground, right? He's not just not resisting. He's vocally reaffirming his compliance with their demands, which, by the way, are unlawful commands. I want to make that very clear. Everything you heard these officers say, every command you heard these officers issue at this point, were unlawful orders. As a police officer, you have no authority over a citizen until you have informed them that you have of the crime that they are suspected of, whether or not they're being detained or arrested, right? Until you have made it clear that you are a police officer, you've identified yourself as a police officer, articulated a reasonable cause of suspicion, and initiated a detainment, right? They never gave him an opportunity to say, look, I didn't do anything. We'll sort it out in court. Right? In theory, that's the correct answer. Right? Officer, you're wrong, but we can argue about this in front of a judge. Let's go. Let's take me away. Right? Instead, they attacked him with deadly weapons, dragged him from his vehicle, and became violent immediately. Right?
Well, there's a reason why one of the charges is kidnapping.
Correct. That's absolutely correct. Under the law, so that you understand this, if a police officer walks up to you and puts you in handcuffs without explaining to you that you're being arrested on suspicion of crime, right? I have to say crime, what the crime is. That is kidnapping. If you're placed in handcuffs for any length of time without having a crime articulated, you have just been kidnapped. That is an automatic federal crime. We've talked about this on the show many times. There are only 2 crimes that automatically elevate to the federal level. I'm sorry, 3. Counterfeit, kidnapping, and arson. Right? Those do not the local police, the sheriff, they do not get to mess with counterfeit kidnapping and arson. Those go straight to the federal level. And Cameron is correct. Each of these officers is being charged with 2 counts of kidnapping, along with second-degree murder and a host of other charges. The current FBI investigation is debating on whether or not to charge them with violations under Title 18, Section 242, violation of civil liberties under color of law. Lord Dro says, "I hope they get life." Yeah, I don't think they deserve life. We're big advocates on this show, or at least I am, of the death penalty. And I think these officers absolutely have justified the death penalty. Now, and I know kind of what Cameron's going to say, and we don't exactly completely agree on this, sort of.
It's fine. This is not the death penalty debate day. This is analyzing. Right.
Well, no. I'm not talking about the death penalty. Now, I mean whether or not these officers should be charged with first-degree murder. I don't think it's that we disagree. What I say is these officers should be charged with first-degree murder and sentenced to death once the conviction is done. Cameron told me that he doesn't think first-degree murder will stick. Those are two different claims. I'm saying that's what should happen. I actually agree with Cameron that I don't think it's possible in the current political climate. This story is not getting as much play as it probably should, for one very important reason. This young, innocent black man who was murdered by the police was murdered exclusively by black police. If it were the case that this was a young, innocent black man who did nothing wrong and he was murdered by white police, BLM would be building gallows in the Capitol. We would already be hearing, huge calls for death penalties and the like on these officers. That would be 100% guaranteed. And as I pointed out with the story about Tony Tempa, if it were reversed, if it was all black officers and a white man that they murdered, you wouldn't even know his name. It wouldn't be reported at all. If you didn't live in the local community and make a habit of reading the police blotter, you would be completely unaware that the story even occurred. Cam?
Okay, so...
Okay.
Yeah, so...
It's harder when you're on the phone because I can't look at you and give you the eye.
Well, I think comparisons to Tony Tempa aren't even... It's difficult to compare this to anything because they didn't just hit him once or twice. Like, they put him through a gang-style beat-in. And, like, at one point in time, like, he's laying on the ground and a cop runs up, and puts the boot to him. Like, this smells like something personal was going on. I don't know what it is. There have been rumors that maybe he slept with one of their wives. I have no clue. But I know that there was so much animosity from the beginning that something personal happened. And there's a couple of things to add into this. One, the police unit that these guys were in has been disbanded.
Yes.
And this is going to make everything in Memphis more dangerous. This is going to make policing more dangerous because now there's a legitimate fear. Like, is this going to be the time I bump into the cops that are, basically psychotic with rage and they're going to beat me to death 100 yards away from my home or whatever? Like, dude was literally almost home.
Right.
And this happened. And the other thing is, the more that I think about it, the more that I think, A, this has happened before, and B, maybe the premeditation is going to come into it because of what they say. They said, well, he went for Dave's gun, and I forget the guy's name, but immediately, as soon as other cops showed up on the scene, they all had their story in place. Oh, they went for so-and-so's gun.
Right.
You know, my dad was a cop, and he told me that one of the things that they drill into you, basically starting from day one, is don't get shot with your own weapon. And it is kind of an unfortunate and not terribly uncommon thing that happens where police officers are assaulted with their own weapons, a la Rayshard Brooks, for example. There's a thing that happens. And if you wanted to emotionally manipulate other police officers, that's what you would say. Because here's how this goes, right? We don't see this traffic cam video where these guys just kick the absolute shit out of him. This guy goes to the hospital, maybe even dies of his injuries, and these officers come in and they get a slap on the wrist. But they get cut a lot of slack because, you know, well, the bad guy went for their gun, and so they got carried away. You know, it's sad, but shouldn't have went for his gun. Only now we know the truth. He never went for their gun, not in any of the footage I saw, at least.
Yeah, I can guarantee you this: if I'm dealing with a hostile, it's not complicated. I'm dealing with a hostile, and I see him go for the firearm of one of my squad members, of one of my teammates, one of my battle buddies. That's done. I'm going to put rounds in his ass, right? Not one of these officers drew a weapon to cover or open fire on Tyre after he fled, when they were clearly assaulting and battering him, right? And he got up and ran. And like I said, from the footage that we saw just from the initial encounter, he had absolutely every reason in the world to be in stark fear for his life. Armored men in unmarked vehicles surrounded him and snatched him from his vehicle without articulating a reason, without giving any articulable cause, no reasonable articulated suspicion, no cause whatsoever. Just, I mean, for all he knew, he was being carjacked by a gang. And let's be real, that's exactly what happened. And he got up and ran. And Fit Life for Danny says if he'd gone for one of their guns, you bet your ass we'd see that footage. Abso 100 per fucking centlutely. Oh, how's that for an infix by grammar nerds?
Well, that would be one of those things that would make such a big difference. Oh, he went for their weapons. Oh, okay. Now all of a sudden we're having a completely different discussion. And that's why that's the lie they use. This makes me wonder how many criminal convictions that these guys were a part of are going to get overturned because of this. Because apparently, do you know why the Special Unit Task Force was disbanded? What the Memphis PD's justification was? This is not the first complaint of violence,
right?
Of excessive violence coming from the task force, which means this has happened before, and these guys are used to being able to get away with this. Honestly, I have so much contempt for them. They're really just bullies. Sad, pathetic bullies that probably did not intend to kill him, but did intend to beat him up, put him in the hospital. You will respect my authority. Well, guess what, buddy? That has backfired, and now you've literally made it more dangerous for all cops, and not unjustifiably so. Maj Toure had a fantastic tweet about, remember that time Tupac was harassed by two drunk cops, and Tupac shot them and didn't go to jail?
You mean this story here from the source, Tupac Shakur was about that action. For all the conversations about the subject matter of his songs being derogatory, few talk about him as a true rider for the community. Like the one time on Halloween 1993 when Shakur drove past two drunk off-duty officers in Atlanta and confronted them for uttering a racial slur. There have been conflicting accounts that the cops were harming a person of color, but many transcripts do not have that information. According to some of the eyewitness accounts, it was one of the officers who first drew and possibly fired a gun, although no weapons were recovered. Clayton County Police, after Officer Mark Whitwell and his brother, Henry County Police Officer Scott Whitwell, were wounded in the incident. Scott, who admitted to possessing a gun he had taken from the Henry County property room, said he felt threatened when Shakur and his colleagues got out of their Mercedes-Benz. At the time, one witness who identified Shakur as having fired a gun following the incident admitted in court that darkness may have obscured his vision. 3 9mm bullet casings were found in the area following the shooting. Court testimony also indicated that racial slurs may have played a part in the incident. Right. And so, yeah, that goes to show you that the law does actually make room for a person to defend themselves against a police officer who is in violation of the law, which these 5 officers clearly were. And Cameron, you mentioned that the task force has been disbanded. I gotta chew into that just a little bit here. Some of the officers have been part of a new anti-violence unit called Scorpion, which stands for Street Crimes Operation to Restore Peace in Our Neighborhoods. Dear God, does that sound like a deeply, deeply contrived, bad late 80s drug war culture flick on, an afternoon special type of. Just wow. Strike Force Scorpion and Scorpion. Okay. I hear this and I hear these words, and all I can think is a bunch of cops in like undercover clothes, and they've got these big cheesy like dojo style scorpion tattoos on their forearms.
Yeah, and just to put a button on the previous point, we say all the time that the primary function of the Second Amendment is not for hunting. It's not even necessarily for personal defense in your life. It is to keep the state in check because the citizens are armed. Again, the Canadian trucker convoy, where they were worried they might be armed. Not that they knew they were armed, they were worried they might be armed, and that was enough to make the cops leave the truckers alone.
Right.
But what happened here is they knew they had this guy, they knew they could do whatever they want with him, and so they decided, well, we're just going to have our way with him because we're the cops, and we're awesome, and everybody else sucks. And this is the result. It's difficult to convey the amount of contempt I feel for these guys over the phone, but it's there. I promise. Like they are bugs on my windshield.
Right. There's so much more that I would love to discuss relative to this particular case, but the fact of the matter is we are running over time, and I'm gonna have to go ahead and put a button in it. I've got stuff to do this morning, Cameron. I know you've got stuff to do this morning, and I suspect after a half an hour listening to me ramble, you guys are out of coffee and need to make a run to the pot. So, with love, we appreciate y'all watching this morning. Lord Dro, I believe this is the first time I've seen you pop up in our chat. Thanks for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and share. The more you share the video, the faster we grow, and we appreciate that enormously.
Hey, real quick.
Yeah,
I think this incident proves it's never been more important to film the police. If that traffic cam footage didn't exist, and if Tyre Nichols hadn't died, I don't think we'd know about this at all.
Correct.
This would be a local story that you had to live in Tennessee to hear about, and that would be it.
Yeah, exactly. And turns out the cute cop that banged all her buddies at work is no longer the worst cop in Tennessee. Of course, and I guess in all fairness, the 5 cops that killed Tyre Nichols are no longer the worst cops in Tennessee either, since they're not cops anymore. That's right.
Okay.
Somebody out there is still wearing a badge who is a worse cop than these guys for precisely the reason that he's still a cop. So, make sure you film the police. If you don't already have one, guys, get you a dash cam. Right? But at a bare minimum, the moment a police officer says hello, the moment he opens his damn mouth in your general vicinity, you pull out your cell phone, and honestly, if you're not somebody who's conducting an audit with a level of professionalism and you know what you're doing with that, don't just film them. Pull out your phone and go live. Go live on your Facebook page, somewhere so that the officer cannot take your phone and destroy it and destroy the evidence that you've collected against his bad behavior. So that if the officer grabs your phone to destroy it in an attempt to destroy evidence, which in and of itself is a crime, let's not forget, then you will have witnesses who watched it happen, and you will have a saved copy that was automatically uploaded to Facebook or wherever it is that you start streaming live. Go live. As soon as you encounter a police officer, immediately go live. The encounter may go perfectly well. It absolutely might. But for the same reason that we don't leave the house unarmed, we don't carry a gun all the time because we expect to use it all the time. We take correct precautions in case they become necessary. Right? Y'all be safe out there. We love you, and we will see you tomorrow.